Welcome to the John Harrison Podcast. Do you realize that 70% of people are disengaged at work? I don't think it's an overstatement to call that a tragedy, actually, because it affects the bottom lines of organizations, certainly, but it has a negative impact on all the people that work there, and their families, and the community at large. Nobody's talking about this. Well, on this podcast, we are going to talk about it. So welcome back to the John Harrison Podcast. I've got Breanna Wells with me today. I've known Breanna for a long time in lots of different aspects of life, so I'm going to let her tell her story. But what we're going to talk about today is really just balancing work and home life, and obviously that's a very common topic. You can Google 8 million things about this, but we're going to try to come at this from just a real life perspective from Breanna's experience, and I'll throw some things in along the way. But Breanna, why don't you just tell folks your story?
Well, John, thank you for having me. I'm incredibly honored to be on the podcast. Yeah, we've known each other about 7 years now, and you definitely were a big part into my story about, this balancing work and life. I worked in the media industry for about 15 years, specifically the newspaper publication industry. I really fell in love with that. I got started around high school, but really just became enthralled with it in college. You hear about people being in college and, staying out all night and waking up and come rolling in from class from, not ever going to sleep. And I definitely did that, but I was not out partying or anything like that. I was hanging out in the newsroom, putting out a newspaper. And so that just, I just really loved the whole process of the news industry. And this was before you got your news on the internet. And so people primarily got their news from newspapers, radios, or television. And so I loved, gathering facts and interviewing people, hearing their stories. It's a very, around the clock industry where, news happens all the time. So you could be doing a news story in the morning or going out and doing, following a story in the evening meetings. And then you would get up and put out the paper and that whole, copy editing, putting the photographs together, the stories, putting it on a page, and then getting it out in time for the press, meeting that deadline.
Little adrenaline rush.
Yeah, it was an adrenaline rush. And, being, young, I thrived on that. Mm-hmm. And so out of college, my first job was a reporter. And again, I kind of went from that, I wouldn't get done putting out the paper till like 4 or 5 in the morning. And, just go all the time. And the same thing was when I graduated college as a reporter. It was the same thing. I was, working, 8 to 5, like a regular shift, doing, newspaper, writing stories, interviews, that sort of thing. But then in the evening, you had, meetings to attend and cover those, and then write your stories at night. Before you went into work the next day, because depending on, the press deadline, you had to get. So it was another around the clock. And I just really thrived on that. I was very driven as a young person. I've always been a very just driven, goal-oriented person of wanting to be a high achiever. And so I just loved that early on in my career. And I worked very hard at it. And throughout the years, I think that was recognized, just that kind of drive. Sure. And I saw that around me, working just late hours. And that was really kind of what we've talked about this before, just this dedicated, and so as my career went on. Yeah, absolutely. As my career went on, I was promoted to, managerial positions where I was a leader of teams of writers and editors. My first job in a manager position was over special publications. And I was very happy to do that, but I had no model for leadership, like what that looked like in terms of, I had no leadership training. A lot of people, I was like that, where you get promoted because you were good at the job that you did, or, you were a hard worker. And I definitely think that was the case because I had no leadership experience. So, being in my 20s and my first leadership position, I really modeled that off of people in the industry. And again, that industry specifically is a very deadline oriented, around the clock. News happens, whenever, and you've got to cover it. But I would just see other leaders in the industry just keep with that same kind of, coming in super early. They would be the first people, in the parking lot, working all day, and then they would be the last to leave. And so I, being young and naive, and I made a lot of mistakes in leadership also. I modeled that same thing. And so, I fell into that trap of, I really created my identity in my career. And being a young person, I think so many people can fall into this of just placing their identity into their job. And I did, and I loved it. And but as time went on, as I matured and became of age, it was really fun, kind of early in your 20s. But then came, the time to start a family. And the last position that I held at the newspaper was a department head. I was a director level. Our department put out 3 community newspapers, an entertainment publication, a lifestyle magazine, and then over 100 special publications. So I had a department of about 30 editors, photographers, writers, designers, and so it was an honor, a great responsibility. But again, just in that role, seeing the kind of culture that the industry that we were in first, and then the kind of culture that, I had kind of walked in the same footsteps of leaders before me, thinking that was the right way. I kind of fell into that. But as I came into my 30s and having children, it really got to me. I started to become burned out. I had my daughter, and I just put that career as number one.
What was, and I know you've got 2 children now, but with your first, what were some of the signs that, hey, I can't continue like this, or you saw suffering at home?
Well, it really started to become a hard issue for me because there was one week I can name, I know, the week that it was, that there was probably several days. I don't know if it was every single day, but there were several days in a row where I would get up before the crack of dawn. My daughter was about 4.5 at the time. And I would get up and go to work, and I would not get to see her. She would be sleeping. I didn't want to wake her, so I didn't see her in the morning. And then we had just publications to put out. And sometimes I would go into, if you're turning a publication that night, 10 o'clock, sometimes it goes to 2, 3 in the morning. And I would not get home. And she would be in bed by the time that I got home. And several days in a row, that's when it really hit me. I felt like I had worked, like I had put in the time to get to where I was. And like I said, that position was really my identity. I felt like I'd worked so hard. I remember before I had my daughter, my mom said to me, well, what are you going, now that you're having a child, are you going to leave your job? And I just felt so like, what? Why would I do that? My career is my identity. And but working and doing that and not seeing, going several days of, not having any interaction with my daughter just really was a turning moment for me, that I can't continue doing this. And so I became pregnant with my son, and I really started just making some steps into coming up with a plan of, I've got to get out of this industry. And even though this position is something that I thought that I wanted, I feel like I fell into this trap of the world defines what success looks like. And you get to this certain point. Once I hit that peak, that kind of mountaintop, I realized that wasn't truly what success in my story was defined for me.
So it sounds like clearly priorities changed.
Yes.
And I know some of you that are watching this or listening to this might say, no, I'm good. Like I'm good where I'm at. And
absolutely.
So obviously that's a personal choice.
Yes.
But what I'm proud of, Breanna, and I've told you this, but sometimes we don't figure this stuff out till we're in our 60s or 70s. And I remember being on an airplane with an executive from Caterpillar. We were flying to Europe, and he had 7 kids, and I had just had my oldest daughter, so she was under a year probably. So we're flying, and I said something to him. I said, wow, I can't believe I missed this little baby. 6 months ago, she wasn't even on this earth, and I just missed her already. And this guy was kind of gruff and not an emotional guy. Mm-hmm. But I looked over and his eyes were kind of welling up, and he said, do not miss your family time and your kids like I did. Mm-hmm. And he was 65 probably, and he said, I feel like I don't even really know my kids, and they don't know me. And this was so out of character for this guy. Like, he was the last person you think would have said that. But, it's like we were just on this airplane, and I think he was being challenged by just when I talked about my daughter. So that's all I think for wherever people are in their lives. We're not telling you what to do through this podcast. We're saying you have to be cognizant of that. It's very hard to do everything.
That's absolutely true. Yes. There are only so many hours in a day, and there's also the idea that, and I think this is especially prevalent in women, that we're told that, kind of women's empowerment. Well, you can do all, you can be all, you can have a family and a career. And again, I know everybody has different choices, different situations, and different priorities, but it doesn't matter, man or woman. Nobody can do it all, or do it all well. There has to be, you have to decide what is going to be, number one for your time. And so I think there are things, there's that balance we kind of talk about where you make, you do things to put that number one thing. What is the number one thing as a priority?
Yeah, and I think, and one of our colleagues used to use this example in our sessions, but we hear this term work-life balance, and we think, well, it's like a teeter-totter, and we've got it right perfectly in the middle. Well, first of all, that rarely ever happens, that we're perfectly balanced at work and home. But if it ever did happen, we know it's not going to last. So his concept was this: if in that teeter-totter, work was really heavy, so you're having to work extra hours, stressful time at work. So now when you're at home, you've got to put extra pressure at home to kind of try to get this in balance, meaning when you are home, be home. Mm-hmm. Don't get on your phone. Don't say, well, at least I'm home, but you get home at 8 o'clock and you're on your phone the rest of the night. So yes, technically you're, quote, home, but you're really not home.
Absolutely. And I saw that, a lot in the newspaper industry, and myself included. We have these devices that we are, connected to, and even through work, having your email connected to that, having people connected where they can just, text you or call you with different things. And I've seen that, I saw that in the newspaper industry where people, they were home, but they weren't really, they weren't really involved or taking advantage of that time at home because they were still connected to work.
That's right. And then on the opposite side, let's say your kids are sick, your parents is ill, there's something going on, a school project, there's something where home is now taking a little bit more of your time.
That's right.
So in that period, then you have to put extra pressure at work to keep it in balance, which means you may only be at work for 4 hours this day or 20 hours this week, but you got to hit it hard while you're there. Mm-hmm. And I think that's more realistic than finding perfect balance. Mm-hmm. But like you said, and the phones and all of these other attachments we have that seem like they're supposed to help us really do hurt. And in our sessions, we talk about, for employees and supervisors, that have that conversation, because the supervisor may not even think anything of, I'm just sending my employee a text at 9 o'clock because this was on my mind. And they're thinking, oh my gosh, I need to either respond to this right away. And the supervisor might, even if they were talking right then, the supervisor would say, oh, no, I don't expect a response right now. But now, literally, they're probably laying in bed going, well, I have to do this to this, and now that changes my day tomorrow. And so maybe that text could have waited till 8 o'clock the next morning, or it could have been an email form instead of text where it's maybe not so urgent, doesn't feel as urgent. So we talk a lot about that in our sessions, that people just need to chat about these things, because sometimes there's unspoken expectations that really, really can do damage too. The other thing I want to talk about, and this is a big family thing too, is vacation time.
Right.
Because people will say, oh, we're taking the whole family and we're going to Florida, we're doing this, we're going to the lake, we're doing whatever. But then we end up spending a lot of time on vacation hooked up to text and emails and all that. So what have you done in that regard? And obviously if you've transitioned through your careers, but what have you done there to help with that?
Well, you talking about that, I think about, just kind of the precedent that was set. And I think sometimes as leaders, I think that you talk about make sure that you're communicating that. And even in the unspoken, people are watching you all the time, and, your employees are kind of seeing, and especially if somebody is, coming into wanting to know, what is this culture like? And there isn't really any sort of foundation there of that is, well known of what is expected, that you can see, you're just watching to see how leaders react to things, what they do. And so we had a leader one time, she took a vacation, and she talked about vacation time being important and to get away from work and that sort of thing. But the actions that were displayed didn't really communicate that in action.
She was connected the whole time.
Yeah, she was connected the entire time. She, said, I'll be available by email if you need anything. And so we were like, well, if an emergency comes up, we'll contact her. But throughout the day, every day that she was on vacation from 8 to 5, we were getting messages sent to us and communicating. And that is kind of sending that message, for employees and leaders. Well, is this what I need to do on vacation? When I go on vacation, this is our boss doing this. And so you got to be careful about that.
Interesting. If you're hearing thunder behind us, it's because it is thunder, and we're just doing real life stuff here. So if you hear some storms, that's what that's all about. One more thing on the vacations, and I've heard this many times. I heard it just when I was traveling the last couple of weeks with clients. People saying, well, I don't even take vacation because I know when I get back, it's going to be so miserable that I'm going to have so many things to do or so many things stacked up that it just stresses me out. So I'd rather just not even take vacation. And to talk about breaking your heart. And that should never be the culture in the workplace. And I think the clients we have that are doing this right, they would say, well, Breanna, if you're going on vacation next week, we've got it. Mm-hmm. You don't even have to be on your phone, or we got it taken care of. We're going to check this, we're going to check that. Now, somebody you might say, well, not in our industry, we just can't do that. There's no way we could do that. But I'll go back not many years. And I remember when I was in Australia for Caterpillar managing a very, very large plant. And if Jen and I and the girls went somewhere, I would go to my admin assistant and say, we're going to be gone for 5 days or whatever. This is the hotel we're staying at. Mm-hmm. And if you need me, call the hotel, because I had no cell phone at that point. This wasn't that long ago. No cell phone, no email access, even 15 years ago. And that was it. If they needed me, they had to call the hotel. Now, I will tell you, never did they ever call the hotel. Not saying that wouldn't have happened, but we kept building very large, expensive Caterpillar machines that whole week I was gone. And I think we've forgotten that it wasn't that long ago that we were able to do that. And so it doesn't mean 100% disconnection all the time after 5 o'clock or on vacation, but we have to talk about these things, because I think so much time that, again, it's unspoken, like you said. So this leader of yours saying, hey, I'm going on vacation, but now you get 37 emails and texts, says, well, I guess that's what I'm supposed to do too. Now, she probably would have said, oh, no, Breanna, that's not what I expect out of you. That's just me. But it does become the culture sometimes. So I think for all of you that are listening, if you're not sure about what expectations are in these areas, then talk to your supervisor. And I'll say this to hiring managers or people that are just interviewing employees. You need to talk about this stuff in the interview. If it truly is your culture that you are to be connected 24/7, then you better tell them that in the interview. Because if you say, oh, no, we value people's work, home life, we're all about that balance, but then it's not happening, then it starts to look like, well, maybe you weren't being completely honest with me in the interview. So I would be honest and say, whether it's overtime, to move up in this organization, we really value people that work 50 to 60 hours a week. Not saying it's the other way, not saying yes, you can have a great career here if you work 10 or 15 hours a week. That's not reasonable. But most of the time we don't talk about these things. And then after people get hired, especially if they're parents, and they go, well, so you're not going to work this weekend? Well, no, my child has this, Girl Scout thing, and I've got this to get. And they go, okay. And it starts to feel like, so is this an expectation or is it not? And so I don't think we talk enough about the stuff in the interview process. And now it starts to be really stressful because it's now become this kind of surprise expectation. So I think all of this, a lot of what we've just talked about, which isn't surprising, comes down to communication and talking about things. Yeah. But even like, what conversations did you have to have with your spouse about this? Like about when you were going through this, either just the stress of working so many hours or the potential stress and the family of you working less hours and changing your job and financial changes?
Yeah, so I'm very blessed to have a very supportive husband. He has always been like my number one supporter all throughout our marriage. I've never felt judged or, like when I would come home late at night I never felt that. He has always been just right there in the midst of it and willing to help and to do whatever we needed to do for our family. And thankfully, that was the same conversation. And, my story ends where that was, I knew that I could not continue being in that industry and having a family. And that's specific to, my story. But I know when we made that decision, it was a very tough decision. And I've never been about money. My husband and I have been very good about like managing, our finances well. We've never lived beyond our means. And so at the time, my husband, he worked, but I was definitely the salary that I was being paid. It was about almost 3 times what he was making, and so it was a huge decision. And we just had to, it came down to that. What is the most important thing? How are we going to prioritize that work-life balance? And so we had to make some huge sacrifices. My husband had just bought a new truck. I remember before I came to him and we talked about, and this had been on my heart for a while, about needing to make a change to get out of that industry. And, he had to take it back. We had to make some, hard choices. It was not easy. And I knew it wasn't easy, but it was a decision, a sacrifice I was willing to make. And I remember my boss at the time telling me, you will never get this back. You will never be in this position, this type of position again. But I knew that to be true, but for my story, that was, something that I was willing to sacrifice because I needed something. Like you talk about that communicating the expectations, like I knew that was part of the industry. I knew that was, part of it, but I was looking for something different. And my family being the top priority from that point on, I knew I wanted to find something that would allow me a better work-life balance.
Yeah, and I hope, that's great, Breanna, and I hope coming out of the pandemic and things we've been through the last few years, that there has been some shifting of that. Maybe some people are making priorities a little, that list looks different now than it did 2 years ago. Even, we've seen just friends of ours who had kids in a million activities, for example, and a lot of those stopped during the pandemic. And we've talked to couples that went, oh, wow, this is kind of nice that we don't run around to, 20 things during the week or on the weekends. Now, I'm not, we're not a parenting company, so not talking about that you have to do things like that. But like you said, the time goes very fast. You can't get it back. And I think, ultimately what we hope we've helped with some of you today is just really taking a closer look at that and really not letting the world tell you what success looks like, either at home or at work. I mean, it could have been the other way, right? Where there would have been a time in our society where women wanted to have a job, wanted to do something outside of the home, and were looked down upon if they did.
Right.
And so, obviously we're not talking about that kind of thing, but we're just saying you are the only one that can define priorities in your life with your family. And we probably don't have enough serious conversations about it. And then all of a sudden you blink and it's been 10 years or 20 years. And like you said, you can't get it back. And so I'm just, obviously I'm a big Breanna Wells fan, but I'm proud of you for what decisions you've made through your life. We, by the way, have been a benefit of that because Breanna helps us now in our little company.
But and just to kind of talk about that a little bit, so I don't know if I told the end of the story, I ended up leaving that job. I was looking for something where I had a little bit more work-life balance, and I thought I was still going to be working full-time. But I had met John at a leadership training session that he did for the Little Rock Chamber. And John was needing some help, and you talked about a work from home position, and I didn't even know that was a thing. This was before COVID. Yeah, I didn't know that could happen. And even in this transition, I was working like part-time, so I was working a lot less than what I did at the newspaper. That was such a blessing. But even in this season, like I'm still navigating that work-life balance because, I'm doing even less now because that priority for me, my family, that comes, that I'm going to do what I have to do to put that at the forefront of everything. Yes. And so, even with that, I've had to kind of shift different priorities, and even working from home is a huge challenge that I think, we think with this COVID, working from home, that there's the perfect amount of work-life balance. I think for a lot of people that they found that it's a challenge,
Well, again, we could have talked about this for hours, but in our sessions, we do talk a lot about setting expectations from a company point of view, but we also talk a lot about kind of the home life and personal things. We do a whole session on burnout and stress. Yes. So one thing that's unique about the John Harrison Group, I hope, is that the sessions that we teach for employees, leaders, whatever, we do hope that 90% of what we talk about applies at home and not just in the workplace. So, Breanna, thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing your heart with us. Hope this touched you folks out there. Again, you can contact us at johnharrisonvip.com, and we'll see you at our next podcast. Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions or thoughts about today's episode, or even ideas for a future episode, you can contact us through our website at johnharrisonvip.com or follow us on any of our social media platforms.